I found out I was getting married through a gold-trimmed invitation, but I had no idea who the bride was. It arrived at my doorstep 2 weeks after Carol vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, no closure. She simply packed her things, left the apartment we'd built together, and deleted me from every part of her life like I'd been a glitch in her story. I waited. I waited like a fool. I sat by the window every night hoping her name would light up my phone, thinking maybe she just needed space, maybe she'd come back when she cooled off. But she didn't. Instead, her mother showed up, in a pressed beige suit, hair tightly pinned, eyes dry, unreadable. She looked at me the way one looks at a broken heirloom, useless now, but once valuable. "You'll be at the ceremony," she said, placing the envelope on the coffee table like it was just another dinner invitation. I didn't open it until she left. My hands were shaking. My name was there, Howard Reeve, groom, but the space next to it was blank. No bride's name, no explanation. It wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some cruel prank or misprint. This was the beginning of something else. Something I hadn't chosen and yet couldn't walk away from. The worst part? The venue was the exact one Carol and I had booked. Same floral design, same guest list, same date. All I could think as I sat on the floor staring at the card was, did she replace me, or did they replace her? But then came the real question that wouldn't stop echoing in my head. If she didn't want to marry me, why was I still the groom? I met Carol in college. She wasn't the loudest or the prettiest girl in the room, but somehow the entire room always adjusted to her presence. She didn't demand attention. She absorbed it. One time, during freshman orientation, I saw a guy offer her a bottled drink, and she politely declined without even meeting his eyes. That same night, she came up to me and asked if I could lend her my notebook because she liked my handwriting. That's how it started. Not with fireworks, not with a grand gesture. Just a girl who liked the way I wrote the letter G. Carol. It was never easy to understand. She was sunshine and shadow stitched together in the same breath. One moment she'd be laughing about some childhood memory, and the next she'd be staring out the window like she didn't belong anywhere. I think that's what pulled me in. The contradiction. I didn't come from wealth. My father passed away early, and my mother ran a small bookstore to get us by. Carol, on the other hand, came from a family with expectations. Reputation mattered. Her father was some corporate executive. Her mother always looked like she was on her way to a charity gala, even when she came to campus just to drop off a scarf. Still, Carol and I made it work. I listened to her rants, sat through her silences, picked her up when she got too drunk at parties, and stayed when she pushed me away. In our third year, I told her I wanted to marry her someday. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. She just smiled that unreadable smile of hers and asked if I would still want her if she disappeared for a while. At the time, I thought it was just a metaphor. I told her I'd always want her. Even if the world turned upside down, she kissed me that night like she believed me. For the next 2 years, we lived like most couples do. We argued over stupid things, movie genres, takeout orders, toothpaste brands, but we also built routines. She liked her coffee with almond milk. I liked watching her sleep in on Sundays. We found a rhythm, even if it wasn't perfect. Then one day, Carol said she wanted to introduce me to her mother formally. Not as a friend, not as a classmate, as her future. I cleaned my best blazer, rehearsed every possible polite phrase in my head. But when I arrived at the penthouse suite she called home, her mother didn't even pretend to hide her disapproval. "You're from the Reeve family?" she asked, examining me like a sales item. "The bookstore, son?" Carol tried to deflect, laugh it off. I stayed calm. I had nothing to be ashamed of. After that meeting, things changed. Carol started coming home late. Her phone was always face down. She stopped humming in the kitchen. Still, I stayed. I believed that relationships go through seasons. Maybe we were in a storm, but we'd find our way out. A month before the wedding, we signed the contract for our new apartment. I remember her fingers trembling as she signed. I thought she was just nervous. The night before our engagement party, she kissed me softly, said she had to meet a friend for coffee, and left. That was the last time I saw her. The next morning, her ring was on the nightstand, along with a single note. I can't do this anymore. No fight, no accusations, just a surrender. I called her 72 times that day. No answer. Her friends didn't know anything, or if they did, they weren't talking. It felt like the floor had been pulled from under me. One moment I was planning a life, and the next I was being erased from someone else's. But it wasn't just her absence that hurt. It was the silence, the emptiness that followed. I didn't tell anyone the truth. I told my mother the date had been postponed for family reasons. I told my friends we were working things out. I told myself she'd come back, until her mother came to the door with that envelope. Melissa was at the engagement party too. She stood by the refreshment table in a pale lavender dress, eyes darting nervously, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Carol's cousin. Quiet, polite, always in the background. We had spoken maybe 4 times in the past 5 years. I remembered once she'd offered me a glass of water when I'd gotten dizzy during a family dinner. That was the extent of our connection. Now, apparently, she was stepping into the role Carol had walked away from. And yet, when she looked at me during the ceremony, there wasn't pity in her eyes. There was something else. Not love, but something close to intention. And that terrified me more than Carol ever did. The wedding wasn't a dream. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a chess move. We didn't say vows. We read from scripts someone else prepared. The officiant's voice droned on while my thoughts screamed underneath every word. I looked at Melissa only once during the ceremony. She didn't flinch. She stood tall, lips still, her expression as unreadable as mine. When the applause came, it felt like a punishment. The reception hall was decorated just like Carol had planned. The same roses, the same gold-rimmed champagne, glasses. I even recognized the song that played during our first dance. It had been her idea. But Carol wasn't the bride now. Melissa was. And Carol was sitting 3 tables away in a red dress, legs crossed, one eyebrow raised like this was all some show she'd directed. When our eyes met, she raised her glass toward me. I didn't move. Melissa leaned toward me slightly. She chose the playlist herself, she said quietly. Insisted on keeping all the original arrangements. I turned to her. Why are you doing this? Her answer was so soft I almost missed it. Because they asked me to. They? She looked away. Your mother. Hers. They didn't want the event canceled. And you agreed? I asked, my voice lower now. Melissa turned her head slightly, her hair brushing her cheek. You looked like you needed someone to stand next to you. I didn't want you to stand there alone. It was such a quiet, absurd reason that I didn't know whether to laugh or collapse. Then I saw him. Alan, Carol's ex. The same man she swore was a mistake, a phase, a past she'd buried long ago. He walked through the reception doors like he belonged, holding a small gift box, smiling politely. He made his way straight to Carol's table. They kissed, not a greeting, not a mistake. A real kiss, right in front of everyone. Melissa's hand was still resting on the table next to mine. My fingers curled slightly, unintentionally brushing hers. She didn't pull away. I stood slowly, ignoring the whispers around me. Guests shifted, in their chairs, confused by the sudden tension. Carol rose too, brushing down her dress, and met me halfway. You look good in a tux, she said. Maybe a little pale, but good. I stared at her. Why did you leave? Her smile didn't waver. Because I didn't want to marry a man who let everyone walk over him. I needed someone bigger, stronger, more decisive. I felt something deep inside me fold and break. She leaned in slightly. Melissa looks good next to you. She's obedient, quiet. That suits you better. And then she walked away. Back to Alan. Melissa didn't ask me what was said. She didn't need to. Later that night, when we returned home, the apartment meant for me and Carol, I didn't say a word. I poured myself a glass of water, took off my tie, and sat on the edge of the bed that wasn't supposed to be mine alone anymore. Melissa came out of the bathroom in her silk robe, hair slightly damp. "I'll sleep in the guest room," she said calmly. "You don't have to," she paused. "You don't have to be polite, Howard. We both know what this is." I didn't argue. I didn't insist. She left the room, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I became a man people replaced and repurposed at their convenience. The next morning, I opened my phone to a flood of notifications. Photos from the wedding had leaked. Comments flooded the post. "Wait, didn't he used to date Carol? Isn't that her cousin? Melissa? Out of nowhere? She's too plain for him. This smells like family drama." I didn't respond. I didn't repost. Carol had already commented on one of the photos. So happy for them. Hope it lasts longer than our rehearsals did. The mockery wasn't subtle. She wanted people to know it had been a swap, a quiet replacement. Melissa knocked gently on my office door that evening. She didn't enter until I told her to. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "but I'll only say it once." I looked up. I never wanted this marriage, but I don't regret stepping in. Why? Because I was there, and you were alone. And I think sometimes it's better to stand next to someone for the wrong reason than leave them to be humiliated for the right one. I leaned back. "Are you asking for anything in return?" "No." She paused. "But I won't stay where I'm not respected either." Her words hung in the air, delicate but firm. When she left the room, I sat in silence for a long time. I hadn't chosen Melissa, but she hadn't chosen this either, and somehow, that made us equal. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a showroom, polished, staged, and lifeless. The kitchen smelled like lavender and fresh polish. The books on the shelves were alphabetized. Melissa even folded my shirts tighter than I used to, but none of it felt mine. At night, I stared at the ceiling until sleep eventually dragged me under. Some mornings I woke up thinking I had dreamed the whole thing, that Carol never left, that Melissa wasn't down the hall, that none of this had happened. But the cold side of the bed and the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen would remind me quickly. I told myself it would pass, that I'd get used to it. But I didn't. Melissa tried to be invisible. She moved quietly, never intruding. She didn't ask about work. She didn't pry into my phone. She didn't question me when I came home late. And maybe that's what made it worse, because her silence was kind. And I didn't know how to handle kindness anymore. Carol was loud, demanding. She questioned everything. If I didn't text back fast enough, she'd ask who I was with. If I worked too late, she accused me of neglect. But at least it meant she cared, in her own twisted way. Melissa simply let me be. And somehow, that made me feel more alone than ever. One night, I walked past the guest room and noticed her door was slightly ajar. I should have kept walking, but something made me pause. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of a stack of sketchbooks. Her fingers were smudged with charcoal, and her face was turned slightly toward the light. There was something peaceful about the way she sat, like she didn't expect anyone to ever notice her. I leaned silently against the doorframe. After a moment, she looked up. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to leave the door open." "What are you drawing?" "Nothing important." She smiled softly. "Just things I remember." "Memories?" She nodded. "Some places don't exist anymore, but they stay with you anyway, so I put them down before they blur." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and walked away. That night, I dreamt of Carol for the first time in weeks. She was wearing white, not a wedding dress, just something simple. She walked toward me, barefoot in the sand. Her eyes were soft, apologetic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. When I woke up, I felt like I had left a part of myself. In the dream, the next few days were harder. I started seeing their names together more, Carol and Alan, on social media, on news blogs. Their photos looked rehearsed, like they had practiced the poses before the camera snapped. Melissa saw them too. I knew because she quietly removed all the framed pictures of the wedding from the hallway. She didn't say why, she didn't have to. I asked my mother how she was doing with the bookstore. She hesitated on the call before saying, "Melissa came by the other day. She helped me restock. Didn't ask for anything." That word again. Nothing. Melissa never asked for anything. But I began wondering what it was costing her. One evening, I came home to find a small box on the table. Inside was a keychain, the one Carol gave me during our second year together. I thought I'd lost it long ago. Melissa was in the kitchen, slicing fruit. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "Drawer, back of the cabinet." I held the keychain, in my palm like it was made of glass. I didn't throw it away because, well, it didn't belong to me. I placed it back in the box. "You could have," she shook her head. "I don't throw away things that aren't mine to lose." There it was again, that quiet clarity she always had. No bitterness, just truth. And that truth made the air heavier around me. That night, I sat in the living room long after she'd gone to bed. I stared at the TV without sound, the blue light, washing over the room like waves. I wasn't angry at Carol anymore. I wasn't heartbroken either. What I felt was harder to name, something like regret wrapped in numbness. I had loved someone who never truly chose me. And now I was married to someone who had never asked to be chosen. It was a cruel irony. But for the first time since it all began, I realized something. Carol's love had always been conditional, transactional, measured. Melissa's presence, on the other hand, was wordless but constant, and maybe that scared me more than abandonment ever did, because one can fight against rejection. But how do you fight someone who stays, with no demand, no threat, and no desire to be owed? The knock came on a Sunday morning. Soft, hesitant, too polite for a stranger. I opened the door to find Carol standing there. No makeup, hair tied in a loose bun, a simple beige coat wrapped around her shoulders like armor that no longer fit. She looked at me like a question she didn't want answered. "I was just in the area," she said. I didn't respond. "Can we talk?" Behind me, I could hear Melissa in the kitchen, humming faintly over the sound of the kettle. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Carol glanced at the building, at the window where our old houseplant still sat on the sill. I didn't know she'd actually go through with it, she whispered. "Melissa?" She nodded. "I thought she'd back out. I didn't think she'd actually marry you." I crossed my arms. "Why does it matter now?" Her eyes flicked to the ground. "Because I think I made a mistake." There it was. The sentence people wait years to hear. The one they fantasize about. The one that's supposed to bring closure. But it didn't. Bring peace. It made something inside me recoil. She looked up again, braver this time. "Alan and I, it's not working. He's different. Everything feels wrong. And I keep thinking about you. About how I left." "You didn't just leave," I said. "You erased me. Then you handed my name to someone else like it meant nothing." Her throat bobbed, but she didn't back down. "Howard, we had something. Maybe I didn't value it then, but I do now. Now that it's convenient? No." Her voice cracked. "Now that it's too late?" Behind me, the door creaked open slightly. Melissa didn't say a word. She simply stepped out with my coat in her hands, holding it toward me. "It's getting cold," she said softly. I took it without looking at either of them. Carol's eyes dimmed. "So this is it?" I slipped on the coat. "You shouldn't. Be here." She took a step back. "I still love you." The wind caught her voice and scattered it before it could reach me. She left without another word. Melissa stood beside me for a moment, then turned to go back inside. But I stopped her. "Why? Didn't you interrupt us?" I asked. She paused. Because I wanted to see what you'd say. Did I disappoint you? She shook her head. No, but I think I finally understand why your eyes are always so tired. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I managed was, do you want to leave? She looked at me carefully, almost studying me. Do you want me to? No. She gave a small nod and went inside, leaving the door open for me to follow. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Melissa emerged from the bathroom in her usual robe, toweling off her hair. I'm sorry about this morning, I said. You don't have to apologize. I do. I turned to her. Because I let her say things she had no right to. And I let you hear them. She smiled gently. I'm not fragile, Howard. Just tired. Of what? Of living in a place where I'm always compared to someone who didn't want to stay. Her words hit with more force than any argument Carol and I ever had. I reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. But she didn't say anything. Either. There was no victory in this. Only clarity, and a quiet kind of hurt that settled between us, too familiar to ignore anymore. 3 days later, I received an invitation. Not a wedding this time, a gala, a corporate fundraiser hosted by Alan's family. The card was tucked into an expensive envelope, the ink embossed, my name printed in bold, Howard Reeve, and under it, +1. I almost threw it away. But Melissa found it on the table that night while clearing dishes. She didn't ask, just quietly placed it back in front of me. You should go, she said. Why? Because you need to see it for yourself. I looked up. What exactly do I need to see? She wiped her hands on a towel, her eyes steady. That she's not the girl you thought you lost. I didn't answer. But I went. Not because I wanted to see Carol. Not even because I wanted revenge. But because something inside me still needed to close a door I hadn't realized was open. Melissa didn't come. She handed me my tie before I left, adjusted the collar of my jacket, and said, You don't owe her anything. Just don't forget that. I arrived late. On purpose. The room was full of glass and gold. Laughter floated between crystal glasses, suits and gowns blurred together beneath the chandeliers. I hated it instantly. Alan spotted me first. His smile was polished, but I saw the strain behind it. He walked over with a champagne flute in one hand, the other extended like we were old friends. Didn't think you'd show, he said. I didn't think you'd invite me. He laughed. PR. We couldn't exactly exclude the city's newest golden couple, could we? I ignored the jab. He tilted his head. So, where's your wife? I sipped my drink. Home. Some people don't need crowds to validate them. He stiffened just slightly, then nodded. Of course. I moved past him and saw her, Carol. She stood near the stage, talking to a group of investors. She looked flawless. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect everything. And yet, something was different. She turned and saw me. For a second, her expression cracked. Just a second. But I saw it. She excused herself and crossed the room slowly. I thought you wouldn't come, she said. You invited me. She smiled faintly. Not really. Alan did. I didn't know until yesterday. Then why didn't you stop him? She didn't answer. Instead, she studied me like she was memorizing something. You look changed. I am, she nodded. Melissa's doing? She had nothing to prove, and that's what changed everything. Carol's mouth tightened. You know it wasn't about you, right? Me leaving? It always was. You just didn't want to say it. She flinched. I thought you were too quiet, too simple, too safe. I wanted more. And now? She hesitated. Now I realize safe doesn't mean small, and loud doesn't mean strong. I stared at her. So you're unhappy with Alan? No, she said too quickly. It's not about Alan. It's always been about Alan, even when we were together. She looked down. He was familiar, but I didn't realize he was hollow until I leaned in too close. There it was. The truth she'd been carrying like a hidden scar. She looked back up at me. I don't want to fix anything. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know that you weren't the one who failed. I know that, I said. Her lips parted like she was about to say more, but I turned and walked away. She didn't follow. Outside, I stood in the cold for a long time. The wind bit through my sleeves, but I didn't move. Then a familiar voice broke the quiet. You're shivering, Melissa said softly. I turned. She stood there in a long coat, her scarf pulled high. You came, I said. I didn't want you to be alone. My breath fogged the air. You always say that. Because it's true. I hesitated. Why do you care so much? She stepped closer. Because I know what it's like to be chosen second and still try your best. I know what it's like to sit silently beside someone who's thinking of someone else. And I know what it's like to hope, even when you shouldn't. I closed my eyes. I never gave you anything, not even a promise. She touched my sleeve. You don't have to give someone the world, Howard. Sometimes just staying is enough. The street was quiet. A car passed. A bird called somewhere in the distance. I looked at her and saw everything I'd been too broken to see before. Not perfection. Not fantasy, but presence, steadiness. A kind of warmth that doesn't ask to be noticed, only to be kept. I don't think I've ever told you, I said slowly, how grateful I am that you walked down that aisle. She blinked quickly. You don't have to say it. I do. She smiled, but it faltered. Then say the rest of it. I stepped closer. I don't know how or when it happened, but I think I've started to look forward to seeing you every day. Hearing your voice, even the way you fold my shirts, it started to feel like home. Melissa looked up at me, her eyes wet. I don't need you to say you love me, she whispered. Just say you're willing to try. I reached for her hand. I'm done trying for people who walk away. I'm ready to try for someone who stayed. She exhaled, and it sounded like relief. We walked back to the car together in silence. Not the kind that hurt, the kind that healed. 3 weeks after the gala, Carol disappeared from social media. Her account was wiped clean. No photos, no stories. Just a black profile picture and a final post. Sometimes you only see the truth when it's too late to fix anything. People speculated. Some thought it was a breakup. Others guessed a scandal. But I didn't wonder. I didn't ask, because I already knew. Alan had been hiding more than just arrogance. It started with a tip, an anonymous message to my business email. Attached were documents, financial transactions, fund transfers, insider dealings, all tied to Alan's firm. At first, I considered deleting it. I wasn't interested in revenge. But then I saw my name, Howard Reeve, listed under potential liability. He had used my marriage to Melissa to leverage favor in a silent merger deal. A scheme that could have ruined not just my reputation, but my mother's bookstore, my father's name, everything I'd worked for. So I sent the files forward, carefully, through the right channels, with enough anonymity that no one could trace it back. 2 weeks later, the fallout began. Alan's father was arrested for corporate fraud. Alan was dragged into the investigation. Their family name, once golden, was plastered across every headline. In the country, Carol stood beside him at the courthouse the first day. On the second, she was gone. The world finally saw them for what they were, shiny surfaces hiding rot. And I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I simply exhaled. Because justice, when served cold, doesn't taste like triumph. It tastes like peace. Melissa found out the truth weeks later. She walked into the office one morning, holding the printed articles, her eyes wide. You did this? I didn't lie. I protected what mattered. She sat across from me slowly. You could have told me. I didn't want you to think I was still fighting for the past. She was silent for a long time. Then quietly, she said, I'm proud of you. It wasn't the praise I expected, but it was the one that mattered. By spring, Alan's assets were frozen, their mansion repossessed. Every post Carol had made, flaunting luxury, now felt like a punchline. But she never contacted me again, and that was the final gift. The silence of someone who finally knew they had nothing left to say. Melissa and I moved back into my old neighborhood. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. The bookstore needed help, and my mother said Melissa brought in more customers just by sitting behind the counter and sketching between sales. We started walking together in the evenings. Sometimes down to the pier, sometimes nowhere at all. One evening we passed by the river, the place where I first told Carol I wanted a future. I stopped for a moment, staring at the soft current. Melissa touched my arm. Bad memories? Not anymore, she smiled. Then let's make a new one here. So I kissed her, right there under the fading sky. No one around, no performance, just us. And it felt different than any kiss I'd had before because it wasn't about possession or longing or fixing something broken. It was about arrival. 1 year later, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my collar. The same one Melissa picked out on our second wedding anniversary. She walked in behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and looked at our reflection. You look calm, she said. I am. Are you thinking about her? No, I replied. I'm thinking about how lucky I am that she walked away. Melissa laughed lightly. That sounds like closure. It is. We drove to the adoption center together. The process had taken nearly 9 months. A boy named Eli, 6 years old, quiet, thoughtful, eyes too tired for someone his age. He didn't say much when we first met. But when Melissa knelt down and asked, would it be okay if we were your family now? He nodded slowly, and then he hugged her. I stood there watching, feeling something in my chest expand. Later that night, he curled up between us on the couch, and for the first time in a long time, I believed fully in the idea of new beginnings, not clean slates, not forgetfulness, but the beauty of building something better after the storm. Carol moved abroad. A friend told me she changed her last name, started over. I didn't ask for details. I didn't block her messages, but she never sent any, and that, perhaps, was the real ending. No last apology, no plea to return. Just quiet. Melissa never asked for any of it. Not the ring, not the name. Not the revenge, but she had everything now. Because she stayed. Because she waited without pushing. Because she saw me. Not the version I once was, but the version I hadn't yet become. And maybe that's the truest kind of love. Not the one that burns fast and crashes, but the one that waits by the doorway, holding the light, until you finally remember where home is. And I did. I found my home.